What's up, everybody? I'm Jesse Showalter, and today I have a really special treat for you guys. I'm bringing a guest on the channel, and his name is Joel Beukelman. He's a designer over at Google. He's previously worked for big companies like Netflix and started his own kind of like startups and everything. And we had a conversation regarding soft skills and character traits, which is something that's really near and dear to my heart, but it's something that's not talked a lot about in the creative industry. People are really consumed talking about tools and skill set and workflow, and very few people are talking about the character traits and soft skills that really drive all of those things anyway. So these are the things that make you hireable and desirable and enjoyable to work with on a team. So whether you work in a small team or a really large company, I think you'll find the conversation we had really, really interesting. Joel's an awesome guy. He's a blast to hang out with. He's got a pretty rockin' YouTube channel as well, where he vlogs about like daily creative stuff and he teaches. So you should definitely watch this video and go over and check out his channel, where actually the other part of this collaboration is, and he interviews me about my top 3 soft skills. I really hope you guys enjoy the conversation. Here it is. Joel, what's up, man? How you doing?
What's up, dude? I'm glad we're doing this.
Yeah, we just got done doing the other one, and now we're jumping over to this one. So really, really excited to I got to share like some of my top 3 kind of soft skills, but I'm really, really excited to hear yours and kind of your backstory. Could you do me a favor, just like for the people, like give me your like 30-second Wikipedia page spiel. Yeah,
30-second. I have a traditional degree in graphic design. Started off in like drawing and painting. Realized I couldn't make money doing that. Well, started in music, then art, then graphic design. Got a formal BA in art. Did traditional branding, print, all that kind of stuff for a couple years. Was unemployed during the recession. Then started building like WordPress sites and like hustling that through. Hated it, but that was like when the iPhone was coming out. Joined a random iPhone startup. Did that for 9 months. Got an article on TechCrunch. Got recruited by Netflix. Went to Google. Left Google. Went to a startup. Came back to Google. And that's been like the last 7 years. And had 3 kids and got married within that too.
So just slightly busy.
Yeah.
Just slightly busy during the last like decade. Okay, that's awesome. I think what's really cool, like I really love chatting with you about this because we are like really, really different. You know, I started doing design before I had any sort of training, and then like went back to school like after, and I've never worked for a big company. I've just kind of like stayed small. I kind of thank Hawaii for that. So I think it's really cool because I talk a lot on my channel about not just like design and tutorials and stuff, but like kind of character and personality.
For sure.
I really want people to like hear your story, but then also kind of like hear what you've gleaned and how you've grown and all that kind of stuff over this kind of experience of yours. So, you know, for you, like, and kind of speaking to people who are just kind of getting started in the industry and wanting to grow, what are your top 3 like soft skills, character traits, whatever you want to call them, that you think are really important in this kind of life that you're living?
Yeah, so I have 3 of these that I prepared because we talked earlier. But like I just want to like echo your point of like personality and character. Like I think that's one reason I came back to Google.
Right.
And why some people don't get hired at Google is not strictly related to how good you are at your thing, but rather who you are as a person and how you interact and engage with people and what you contribute to the culture of the company. And that's just something that was like super unique that I wanted back after leaving. And so I think like all these things relate to that. But I think when you talk about soft skills and character, one of the hardest things that I think a lot of creative or even technical people have is they're introverted or they're awkward in social situations, or they only do their one thing really well. But when you're working in a business relationship or in a large organization, you have to work with other people, right? And so there's other skills there at hand. I think the biggest thing, and one that I've been learning to get better at, working like in the larger organization, is communication. Okay. And I think this is like, I think designers usually are pretty good at this as far as like critique, and like, you know, sharing your work. But obviously that's from like a design point of view. I think I've had to learn how to talk about my design in different ways depending on who the audience is, especially like in pitching designs. It's not really whether the design is the right or wrong thing. It's how does this design relate to a certain business need, to competition, to technical constraints or like implementation concerns. And so how I talk about design has been something that I think has helped me senior up and be successful within the company.
Right. You just did like a talk, didn't you, on like documenting design in Mumbai or Dubai?
Yeah, it was in Dubai.
Okay. Yeah. So tell me, I mean, that's part of like communication as well, as like communicating?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, like communicating your actual design throughout the different like phase of a project is a whole nother thing.
Sure.
That I think there's lots of tools and lots of, I think the design community talks about that a lot. Like if you search like process on Medium, there's tons of ways to do that, right?
Right.
I shared kind of how we do it internally at Google, and I'm going to write a Medium post about that as well. But I think designers are better at that than they are at like writing emails, right?
Okay, so let me ask you this then: how do designers or people who want to be like creatives, how do they get better at that first kind of version of communication you were talking about?
I think this is one of the benefits of working at a big company is that you spend time and are exposed to people that aren't like you. I find that it's often in the design community I had a podcast or a YouTube video called like Design as Church, in the sense that like design cares about design and the designers in the design community in the same way that a church cares about its church and the programs the church has. And it's a very like insulary and like an echo chamber in a way. And so I think I got better at this by having close relationships with senior project managers, with other people and leaders within Google that do this really well, and through just general feedback. So if you're not at a big organization, I think it's like actually hanging out with people that aren't designers. I think that's
that really always good advice, right? Hang out with people that aren't like you.
It seems simple, but it's a really big deal. I get a lot from my dad. He's like a literature major and a pastor, and like he talks a lot, and so. I think this goes back to empathy to like some of the points you made when I was asking you questions, but I think that even something as simple as like being timely like in chats and having proper email etiquette, I think really matters when you're not even within a big company. If you're freelancing, how you communicate really changes the way people perceive you as a professional, even broader than a designer. So I think that's one thing that I've changed a lot and still always working on. Like I'm learning how to be more brief in email communication, knowing that like everyone's time is precious. All those little things, so like little small hacks that have a huge impact in the end if you do them right.
I have trouble, and I'm still trying to grow in, is learning when to be brief and when to be thorough and actually being those things when they're called for. That's hard. Yeah.
Well, and even like my old CEO Mark Hamian had a thing like, don't ever say this or that. Like say what you're talking about. Don't let there be any ambiguity.
Right.
Like there's no reason to say sorry and apologize. Like just be direct, say what you mean. Make sure that you're only talking about the important stuff. And so I constantly struggle with that, but I think it's a core thing that most designers are pretty bad at, and I was as well.
Totally agree. Okay, what would be like another one for you?
Okay, so this one's hard, but I would say like adaptability.
Okay.
I think that I have critique as like a sub bullet of this, and that I think it's easy, especially when younger designers have made their mind up that this is the right solution, being able to adapt either to like a project changing, right? Like, hey, we're going to do this. Oh, actually, we're doing this now. Or you're doing this. Oh, there's a new CEO, or we're not going to do this project anymore. Sorry.
Sure.
Being able to adapt to the constraints of a project or the constraints of a team, or things that are change. I think being able to adapt and still not lose sight or excitement or curiosity towards a project is really important. This happens a lot at Google, where like they're like, oh, this reorg, you're now report to this person. This project's not happening anymore. You're working on this now. Being able to like brush that off and keep going, I think is something that, I mean, you could be bad at this. It just makes you less happy. I've learned how to like, be more adaptable and be content. Right.
Do you think that this is one of those things that you have to learn by failing forward a little bit and kind of like,
for sure.
Yeah,
for sure.
Hard to kind of like actually learn without like getting punched in the face, like a time or two.
Yeah, I think it's probably just age. Like you start to realize that like, oh, every team has drama, every job has its downsides, and so change your perspective to like more the long game of like everything's gonna be fine. This is just a bump in the road, right? Like it's inevitable. There's no perfect scenario.
Sure.
I think that adaptability works too within the context of like tools and craft. Like people get very prescriptive, like, well, this is how I do it. Right. And I think the more adaptable and more curious you can be about, oh, like even now, like, oh, Sketch, Figma, XD Studio, like InVision Studio, all these things. Like there's so many tools, so many resources, so many ways to think about design. I think the more curious and adaptable, the more you're going to learn, rather than being prescriptive and like opinionated and be like, this is how I think about things.
What I think what's really interesting, and I don't want to talk about tools, but what I think is really interesting is like what came out of like everybody being so linear with like, for instance, like the Adobe suite of tools, like that was it. That was the industry standard.
That's all it was.
What came out of that was everyone just fighting against that and going, we want more options.
Yeah.
But it's really weird. Everyone's gone back to being so like picking their corner and staying in it, whether it's this one or that one. I'm going, guys, this is how we got here, by wanting to explode out into new options and be adaptable.
Yeah, well, and even being like, oh, like I need an animation, I'm just going to go download this thing. Like I've been trying like some 3D programs and been doing a lot more animation, and it just it's better to have those tools and processes when you need them, right? Like every project is different, so being adaptable to like, oh, this project's going to make me have more UX or more visual or more animation.
Sure.
Like I think that makes people it makes you a better designer because you can tackle more problems and rely, especially if you're working for yourself.
Yeah. That was super awesome. Adaptability. What would be your last one, if you would say?
The last one I named differently, but is very similar to one of the answers you had, which is I'm calling it self-awareness.
Okay.
And under this, I feel like fits in like empathy, humility, and bias. But I say self-awareness because like one of my biggest struggles and things that I'm constantly like reframing things for me is that like we live in a very Western, privileged, like wealthy, capable culture, right?
Okay.
So designing software, if you look at Dribbble, everything's on a brand new iPhone.
Right.
A lot of our patterns assume a certain sophistication, a certain access and context.
Right.
Designing for something like Chrome, everyone's using it. So like they're usually empathy is like, oh, are they old, are they young? Accessibility, contrast.
Sure.
But like we're even rethinking features because like we're acknowledging that half of the people we're designing for don't have access to internet.
Right.
Right. They might not have, legit plans for their phone. So like how would you design a feature if you can't actually get to the URL? Mm-hmm. Like what if you only have access to download that page in certain parts of your neighborhood? Right. Right. And so like understanding that like we aren't the actual dominant use case globally, like even iPhone versus Android, like obviously a lot of design stuff is iOS centric because designers use iOS. iOS is a huge popular platform in the US and in Western cultures, but Android is the largest mobile operating system because most people can't afford an iPhone. Right. And so like even that context change of understanding your bias and who you are in the world and what has flavored your perspective and trying to strip that off so that your designs are actually pure to who you need them to work for. I think is something that every designer should do, but even more so designing at a company like Google, like that has to come from research and from like a lot of introspection and being like, oh, I'm different from these people, sending through a lot of user research studies. Right. And that's hard to do without like the added information that I'm getting from being internal.
Do you feel is there any like tangible like sacrifices or switches or changes that you like? I noticed you're wearing like a piece of Android gear on your wrist. Like, is that an intentional decision to try to experience life a little bit more like your user base, or is that just you happen to like those?
Yeah, and I mean I do that every year. I switch mobile platforms every year. Okay. I've got 4 laptops because I design for desktop now, and so like I'm constantly using other operating systems and switching up my daily driver so that I understand. I became an Android fan at Netflix designing for iOS because I was designing an Android app and I didn't understand any of it. Right. And I forced myself to go on Android for the year for the project. And I was like, this actually works a lot better for me. And a lot of the notification things, stuff that you could look at, but you don't really feel until you get into like the daily use of it. Right. And so that's when I became a huge Android fan. But even then being an Android fan would go back to iOS because they would come out with new conventions, new navigational patterns, new whatever. Right. And so I'm a big fan of that. Like I had a talk called "Your Bias is Bullshit" for a long time. That was like went out and like challenge everything that you think is normal because it's not. Right. And so I generally think that's a value as a designer. I also think that you get a lot of this just by being a person in the world, right? Like one of my points was always like just talk to the person next to you in a bar, right? Because they have a different perspective on the world than you do, right? And so I've met like rocket scientists and brain surgeons that don't use tech that have kids, and like hearing their view of my role or software or their phone is what your user is, right? That is the person you're designing for. It's not your perspective. And we want to design things for us, but unless it's a design software, it's probably the wrong.
Right. Yeah,
and I think too that like it's easier now because there's so much available. Mm-hmm. Like 10 years ago when I started doing mobile design, there was hardly a HIG guideline from iOS. There was no material design. There weren't even like guidelines for Android.
Right.
Windows Phone wasn't out, right? So there was no like common practice. There was CSS and like the responsive web was just becoming a thing.
Sure.
But I feel like now for anyone that is watching your videos that's new, like just go download every damn thing.
Everything. And
spend some time with it. Like when I started my first iPhone I had never designed a mobile app before, and I was the creative director of the startup. Mm-hmm. I just downloaded every GUI template, PSD, whatever I could find on Dribbble, and like tore it apart and learned how to rebuild it. And I was like, okay, at least I can draw screens.
Right.
I had to learn how to use them, but like that is half the battle, right? Like school's not going to teach you that either. They're just going to teach you like philosophy. Like you have to put in the time. Yeah.
That's I think put in the time for me is like what sums up all of this. It's like, yes, put in the time with like the craft and the skill, but like if you want to develop character traits like these, if you want to develop soft skills, they also require you to put in the time.
Yeah, absolutely.
100%. Yeah. Joel, thanks a lot, man. I appreciate just like chatting, and this is awesome. It was so much fun.
This is good. We'll do this in person at some point.
Okay, sounds good, dude. Okay, see you later.
Dude, cheers up, good.
Well, that's it for this video. It was a really fun conversation with Joel. I really encourage you guys to go over and check out his channel. He has tons of amazing content. That's also where you'll find the other part of this collaboration where he interviews me. And he also started a new podcast called Beukelman Banter, which is absolutely the best name for a podcast I've ever heard in my life. So go check that out. I'll put the links of everything down in the description. I really like doing collaborations. It's just fun to hear other people's perspective and chat with them about things. I'd love to hear your ideas on who you'd like me to collaborate with. Leave that down in the description as well, and maybe I can reach out and we can make it happen. Until next time, I hope you guys are making amazing things. I hope you're designing amazing things, and I hope you're building up those character traits. That's what really matters. See ya.